Hello and welcome to the SHIPSHAPE podcast, a series of podcasts where we meet amazing people and talk about their experiences, personal, technical, and all related to the maritime world. Come and dive in, dive in.
This week on the SHIPSHAPE podcast, we speak with Matt Fradette. If you're into boating, you've likely used one of his products, namely Dockwa. And there's many stories behind how it was started, from sailing journeys to cheating the devil, but today we're going to find out. Your two hosts today are Meryl Charette. I'm a liveaboard on a Tashing Toshiba 36, and T.
Hi, this is Talha Bhatti on my Lures powerboat in Virginia. And it's such a pleasure to have Matt on the show because his product has literally saved my life a bunch of times and probably gotten me out on the water way more than I would have if I had nowhere to go. So welcome to the show, Matt.
Thanks for having me, guys. Awesome to be here.
Where are you recording this from?
Well, I'm not on a boat currently. I'm currently in my home office here in Concord, Massachusetts, just right outside of Boston.
So, Matt, maybe to start with, there's so many myths around, urban legends around how Dockwa started. How did it start? I've heard that, the two partners went up and down the coast and they'd had it, and then they made their own app. And is that what happened?
I want to hear these urban legends. Well, that's not too far off. We didn't necessarily go up and down the coast and have it, but there's sort of a combination of things that came to fruition. So it did come out of personal experience. We knew just being on the water, primarily down in the Rhode Island area, Newport, Rhode Island, sort of what the process was for making reservations and how frustrating it was. And, my co-founder Mike and our CEO had come back from a trip out to Block Island one day, and through personal experience, took the trip out there, kind of rolled the dice. Didn't book an advance reservation because he hadn't heard back in an email that they sent, couldn't get anybody on the phone, so they went out to try to get it flipped. And that was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back, where he came back and, is this frustrating everywhere? And him and I always just sort of had this entrepreneurial itch to scratch. We were both at different startups at the time, and we started just digging into the problem, just again, being familiar with how frustrating it really was on the boater side. We said, man, this is the way to do it. There's this level of convenience and experience in every other aspects of our lives, but solve it for the marine industry, and we should solve that for boating because it would make our lives way easier and make the lifters easier. So that's kind of where the idea stemmed from. And again, being on top of the busiest transient marinas anyway in the country in Newport, Rhode Island, we knew that was a really acute pain, and particularly for cruisers in New England, that we could dig into. And that's really kind of what sparked the idea. But what happened is we started digging in on the business side, right? We started at why does that problem exist? And when we started doing that, we were spending a lot more time in marina offices, and we were the frustration exists because of the lack of the systems and the lack of the process on the marina side. And, maybe they have software, but if they do, it's on-premise, legacy, outdated. There's no direct connectivity to the customer, the consumer. It's a really bad experience. And that's if they're using software. In many cases, it was just paper, cash, and
mom and pop shop, right?
And so we said, well, that's why this is so awesome. We could fix, then we could, connect that to a network of consumers that are ready for a much more modern and convenient way to make reservations. And that's where we started, is really with the short-term, transient reservation side of things. And it grew from there. So we didn't really have to look too far to find other verticals or industries that had parallels, right? We looked at restaurants, and Open Table was doing this well. We sort of looked at some other spaces and we drafted off of what had been working in other spaces. And there's an opportunity here to build out this marketplace that ultimately could be better for boating. And that was in 2014 when we launched a product in May of 2015.
Wow, that old? No way.
Oh yeah, we launched the product in May of 2015 at Fagawi. The Fagawi race on Nantucket was sort of our launch party, if you will. We had reservations that day, really a big day, but that official first day that Dockwa was in the market.
That's cool. I didn't realize it was almost 10 years old.
Yeah, we're going on, I guess it's our eighth season.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what was that journey like? Like, break that down for us. What have the last 8 years been like?
A lot of fun, a lot of, there's some painful points, like, starting, I heard someone at one point say, starting a company oftentimes is like chewing on glass and staring into the abyss.
You're giving us lots of hope here. Yeah.
I can say we've had a lot of fun. We've had a lot more ups and downs. We're incredibly fortunate. When you look at the mortality rate of startups, it's something like 95%, right? That don't even last past the first couple of years. So,
yes,
I feel very fortunate that we are where we are. We've still got a long way to go, but it's been a learning experience, no doubt, right? We're coming into really an industry that has been antiquated, for the lack of a better term, and operational level, people have just been sort of running these businesses the same way for 30, 40 years. They're busy, right? Their cash flows are pretty good, and they're saying, well, I'm not really motivated to change, so I have to modernize. And when it comes to being first to market, like, sometimes it's not all that fun, right? Because you are simultaneously educating an entire industry why they should change.
Yes.
Very. So, we've been successful. We are experiencing now more change than at any point in time. I think COVID had given some tips people needed to modernize, and some others that, we can talk about, but we're just finally starting to changing of the guard where, the modernization of these businesses have started to happen. So, like, we joke all the time, like, going into the marine space and selling software into marinas back in 2014 was like stepping into hotels and selling them software in like 1990, right? Like, they were really that far behind the curve when it came to tech.
One thing that you hear all the time when it comes to the marine industry is the sheer opportunities that exist. And generally, when I talk to people that aren't in the industry, I'm like, picture an industry where all these things that you take for granted just don't exist. So I'm sure in the beginning of Dockwa, when you first realized the problem, we're like, oh, we can start a business. I'm sure there was like, whoa, this could be a real big business, huh?
Yeah, well, I think if you look at just the number of marinas in the United States, on the surface, people might look at that and say, well, how big can this business actually be? But when you factor in the fact that that's actually kept a lot of people out, and when you layer on the dynamic of actually building a marketplace, right? You're not just selling B2B software, you're actually building a two-sided marketplace, consumers and businesses, right? In our case, boaters and marinas. We build that marketplace by selling marina software tools to make their lives easier, save them time and headache, and allow them to offer a better guest experience. And through that, the more marinas that we're adding and joining the Dockwa network, we attract more boaters, right? And create more liquidity in the marketplace. So, if you're only looking, Merrill, at the sheer number of marinas in the United States, maybe some people say, well, how big can it get? But when you layer in the factor that there is a marketplace to be had and to be built, yes, it can get big. And, we looked at transient reservations that really just are entry into the market. We looked at, okay, that's a painful thing. The experience really sucks for boating. There is a business problem, right? Where if you build something elegant that solves a problem, you could say, hey, use this. It's way better than your notepad. And then, oh, by the way, you can also plug our tech into your website for the first time ever, offer web reservations to your website without having to make a huge expensive change. That worked really, really well. You can connect that to the consumer marketplace of boaters that were, the bar was really low. They were looking for just a response, a way to get in touch, and they didn't want to have to send an email that didn't hear back from, or use the phone and just, get a voicemail. And that allowed us to sort of, I think about it as like a wedge, right? Like, focus on one thing, do it really well, and then build from there. And now we're to the point where we're laying on different experience products and services on both sides, and just adding more value to the marketplace in general, and really building the business.
So Matt, what you're making it sound like the initial product you developed, on its own costs like millions of dollars. Like, could you give us an idea of like what something like that, just putting it together in the beginning, say you were a new business owner, like how much of a startup sort of, thing should they keep in mind?
Yeah. Oh, certainly it costs millions of dollars. I can't give you an exact answer, but I will tell you at one point in time, we paid like $50,000 just for sort of wireframes just to work with an outside development shop to build the MVP. It is extremely expensive if you don't have internal developers. We were fortunate enough early on where we were able to recruit some internal developers and start doing everything in-house and get a product to market. Without doing that, it would have became, too expensive very quickly. Yeah, at this point, we didn't spend $1 million like right out of the gate, but certainly if you're using outside development, you should expect to invest significant amount of capital into that if you don't have an internal team.
One of the things that you've mentioned was education, right? Because you were a first mover in it, so you had to educate people. And we have all seen many products come into the industry that do fill this need, yet they don't make it. And I personally believe it's probably because of the education and really having to communicate what exactly the benefit is to the customer. So do you have any tips on communication in our industry?
Well, it depends. I mean, I think, right, the boaters they grokked in the media. We would we would be on the ground at boat shows and they'd say, yes, this is awesome. We were pretty localized. Like, we knew that if we could win in New England, then we could grow from there. So in the very early days, it was really, Meryl, about educating the marinas. And we needed them to say, okay, yeah, if we build this, we will come, type of thing, right? And if you're building a marketplace, you always have this chicken or the egg problem, right? Both sides are reliant upon one another, the supply and the demand, right? The supply is going to be the marinas for us and the demand is the boaters, but they both want each other on the platform to find value or liquidity in it. Does that make sense? You need to decide which way you go first strategically to be able to build that marketplace, and education is the core component of it. So I'd say we invested, and to this day, we still continue to invest, although we're getting much better at investing more heavily on the boater side. We needed to be able to accomplish what we wanted to. We needed to focus on educating the marinas more. So our whole sort of go-to-market strategy, if you will, was, again, building these tools that solve the business problem and then selling in to the marina that if you did it this way, it saves you time, it reduces the amount of operational burden, it creates efficiency. And, oh, by the way, the more marinas we get to join, the more boaters are joining, so you can actually create incremental revenue, right? P, you just said it before we got on this podcast. I love hearing these stories, right? You are at the marina you are at today because you found it on Dockwa, right?
Yep.
Right. So you booked a transient reservation. It sounds like you had a good experience. You liked that marina a lot. You liked Virginia. And you said, hey, I'm going to stay, right?
Yep.
And
absolutely.
I love hearing those stories. And it's not in isolation. You hear those all the time. So sometimes, Meryl, to get back to your question about education, sometimes a marina looks at it and they say, well, transients are only 5% of my business. So, like, I don't necessarily want to pay to be, on this, or I don't need to change. And we need to say, well, with respect, I'm going to challenge your way of thinking about it, right? And then we tell a story about tea, or we tell a story about, somebody that broke down, had engine trouble going out to Martha's Vineyard, so they pulled into, somewhere on Cape Cod, and they all of a sudden became a seasonal customer for 5 years. And it's like the lifetime value of someone that comes to you through Dockwa can be a lot more than just maybe a $200 reservation, right? They're going to come on board and then they're going to spend at the marina. Maybe they'll come back next year. Maybe they'll stay a transient, but maybe they won't. Maybe they'll be like you, that had a great experience and they want to become a customer and they want to lease a slip. So that's just one example of, like, we do have to educate about the overall value of the marketplace in this day and age and the value it can have for these small businesses. And then there's another component of it that is as they go deeper as we build out full marina management software. We really need to educate about operational efficiencies that if they just modernize their processes, their systems, and they use something like ours, the benefits that can have on the business and their employees and ultimately their customers.
Sweet. Good job.
So obviously, from the time you started in 2014 to now, there's been some innovations that have happened in marine. What are the big things that you've noticed over the course of your company's 8 years?
Well, yeah, there's some obvious ones, and then there's some, there's some maybe not so obvious ones to people. Mm-hmm. I think the electric innovations, right? Those are super encouraging, cool, and everything. The marine industry's got a long way to come, particularly with the infrastructure at the marinas to be able to support, right, consumer technology. Isn't that right? So, we've seen some awesome innovations on the consumer side, but, again, the infrastructure, it needs to come along for it to really take off. So I'm excited about some of the change that's happening more on sort of the business side with that, to be able to support. Specific to our business in the marinas, there's been a ton of change really when it comes down to consolidation of the space. Like when we first started, 80 to 85% of the industry was sort of mom and pop. And now what you've seen is this huge surge of consolidation by private equity groups coming in and saying, hey man, marinas are a really interesting real estate investment for a variety of different reasons. And, you know, they started pouring money into the space in 2015 as Safe Harbor Marina, the biggest player in the space, got started. They sort of proved the model out. And then there's been so many others following suit, right? There's still only like maybe top 3 of sort of the big guys, but what's been the biggest, what we've noticed, I guess, over the last like 5 years, there's a lot of smaller players coming in, still backed by a lot of money and that want to buy marinas, but they're just, I feel like I see a new one every single week coming in, you know, from a real estate investment standpoint, trying to build a portfolio, whether they're trying to flip it to the big guys or build their own business for the long term is sort of TBD. But that's been a big change in just the overall landscape that we've noticed in our day to day over the past 5-6 years.
And then we'd heard during the COVID times that this was like, the most boats were being sold ever. That sort of data was coming out. Were you seeing that on the Dockwa side? Were the most slips ever getting booked? Yeah.
Yeah, we saw a lot of growth during COVID. It didn't, like many others, we didn't know what to expect at first. We were sort of bracing for the worst, like February, March 2020, we'd be like, oh boy, what's going to happen? And then, fast forward a few months, and then in June of 2020, marinas were super full. Boats you couldn't even keep them in stock, right? Manufacturers were selling out with multiple year wait lists, and boat sales were at a high. And it's, looking back on it, it's interesting. Like people didn't have their time and interest being competed with like they used to, right? Like we couldn't go to a Red Sox game or a concert, and more people were looking for ways that they could, from a socially distant perspective, get outside, and boating was certainly a beneficiary of that. And if more people are buying boats, marinas are going to be busier than ever. So a lot of marinas were looking for, ways to streamline efficiencies and offer more cashless payments and transactions. And we certainly saw a bit of a surge. And I think transients took a little bit of a dip just by virtue of maybe people not traveling as far, but marinas were very busy because more people had boats and they were having, from a seasonal or an annual flip perspective, needed a place to put them, and still do. So marinas are still super, super full.
Yeah, COVID was certainly an interesting time for the industry. Living on a boat and being at the marina and so many people boating, it was like COVID really never existed for me in my mind.
You're fortunate.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it was very interesting to experience, and we're still going through it, right? Like there are these wait lists for boats. Like the things have started to normalize a little bit. I think, with the economic outlook for the next couple of years, there's going to be a correction. But even if from a boat purchasing standpoint, it goes down or it doesn't match the velocity of the last couple of years, which it won't, I think the influx of people into the lifestyle is going to stay. Right. So I think, marinas will continue to be full. You'll see more people out on the water. Now, we'll see what happens with used boat sales in the next few years. You're likely going to see, a spike on the other end of people sort of getting out of it. But I think enough people were introduced, and they were younger as well. I think the stat was like for the first time in 20 years, the average boat ownership went to like the low 40s, right? Where that was a huge concern, is that there was this aging population that was diverse and a problem, right, for everybody. And you saw COVID really dramatically shift that. And just because the economy is going into a different cycle, I don't think you're going to see all of that just evaporate. I think a lot of it's here to stay, which is a terrific thing.
One of the, I've dwelled on that question for a while. It's like, what happens a few years down the line after this whole, COVID buy up of boats? And, sure, there's certainly going to be a dip, but I think what COVID did is create awareness of all the different opportunities that exist for outdoor recreation. And with how these boat manufacturers are so backlogged, it's like, oh, there's way more people that want to get into boating than there are boats. So it'll be interesting to see. One of the things that
Right.
I've heard along the way is the concern about spaces at marinas, and you hear it all the time, where people are like, I can't dock my boat anywhere because there's no space for me. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, it kind of goes back to one of the things I mentioned about why marinas are such an interesting real estate investment. That's one of the dynamics of the space that people look and they say the laws of supply and demand. Demand is so high and supply is so low, and you can't just go build a new marina, right? Like from a regulatory standpoint, it's extremely hard. It's hard enough to expand a marina if you own one. Sometimes it's impossible. Other times you have limited options. So you're exactly right. Like it's going to continue to be at a premium to, find space for your boat. I think there's going to be different options. I think, people will expand dry storage, which is a really good opportunity, right? Especially for people that are buying center consoles or smaller lake boats and things like that. I think you'll start to see some alternative options for storage than wet flip in more seasonal markets like New England, for example, where dry storage hasn't been a huge business. I think you'll start to see people get a little bit more creative, Merrill, so you have some more options going forward. Yeah, but you're exactly right. I don't really foresee that problem going away, and it's good to be a marina operator right now and have those laws of supply and demand, right?
Yep.
This show was sponsored by
MIDA, the Marine Industry Digital Agency. We know a lot about the marine industry. Whether it be service, sales, repairs, we have it covered. Right. How are we going to help you? Easy. We are MIDA, the Marine Industry Digital Agency. Our marine knowledge, whether it's basic web development, adding video, sprucing up that tired website, new feature or app created for your customers' phones, we have it covered. Traditional marketing, advertising, or PR companies don't know anything about the marine industry, but we do. Check us out at www.mida.pro or drop us an email at info@mida.pro. Let's discuss how we can improve your brand, increase your sales, and take you to that next level.
Welcome back to the SHIPSHAPE podcast.
Well, I think we answered it, where essentially it's like how exactly a marina is going to handle how few slips they have and how many boat owners there really are. Luckily, I'm almost grandfathered into the marina I've been at for the past 5 years. One of the things, right, is not only are you guys working on Dockwa, but you're also doing, what is it, camp out? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, camp outs, yep.
So can you talk a little bit about all the other things that you guys have been working on?
Well, I will say the primary focus continues to be on the marine industry. We know that we still got a ways to go, both on the marina software side as well as the boater side. Now we're to the point, I'm super excited because we've been building primarily for the marina for the past 7 years, call it, where we have been building for the boater as well, but not as heavily as we've invested in the marina, because we've known to build out this marketplace and create a valuable product, make it easier for boating. Like we needed the marinas on, back to my whole chicken or the egg thing, right? So that's been our strategy. But now we're to the point where we're really going to be innovating the boater side, which I want to talk a little bit about because it's super exciting. And then with camp out, we are working on it. It's still a little bit in stealth mode. We decided to push out the launch a little bit just because we understood the opportunity in the marine industry that we had ahead of us and that we needed to really focus and execute and build some of these core features. So that's where most of the focus is on Dockwa, and into 2023, likely toward the end of 2023, you'll start to see us, test some things in the market and in other verticals like outdoor recreation.
So what are some of the things you plan on doing on the boat owner end?
Well, so on the boater side, it's been interesting. We feel like we have our PhD in transient reservations. That's what our CEO Mike likes to say, and I totally agree. That's where we started. That's a problem that's well understood. It's a product market, or a product that has great product market fit on both the marina and the boater side, and it's working really, really well. But what we've learned is twofold. One, marinas were coming to us and said, hey, I love Dockwa for transient, but I have all these other aspects of my business and I'm not happy with the systems or the tools or my processes. Can you build X, Y, and Z? And on the boater side, we started to hear that as well. We said, hey, I'd love using Dockwa for transients, but I'm using it for a lot more, using it as a platform to do research and sort of all these various phases of travel. I'm, researching locations and services and amenities. I'm looking at rate. Of course, I'm booking transient reservations. That's still core to what we do. But I guess the point was like they were saying, I want to use it to contact marinas about other things that I'm looking for as well. It might be fuel. That might be long-term slips or dry storage. That might be service, right? So we've evolved the marketplace to have a little bit more utility than just transient reservations. And we're allowing boaters to contact these businesses that are using our software for other things, right? And at the same time, we're increasing the overall value that marketplace brings to the marinas that use the software. And we're building the tools out for those marinas to operate more of their business. So, the analogy that I can maybe give you, I said we were more like open table for restaurant reservations when we first started, right? Are you familiar with a company called Toast? More like restaurant full point of sale. So we've evolved or evolving more into being like a Toast for the business. So we'll have a full point of sale for the marina. We have the ability for them to do their digital split contracts and agreements for dry slips or storage for their customers. Right. So instead of just booking a transient reservation, you could get your slip renewal from your marina on your phone, sign it, enroll in automatic billing, and manage that whole process through Dockwa. And you could also, chat your marina and say, hey, I need 4 bags of ice. Any way you can bring that over, and it could wind up like or just be charged automatically without you ever having to go into the office. Right. So that's really the experience that we want to provide. We want to continue to build out the boater platform to accommodate experiences in all these phases of travel, whether they're researching and planning, whether they're navigating, whether they're booking, whether they're reflecting about an experience and figuring out where to go through next. We have a lot to do on just the overall boater experience to make it more enjoyable to get out on the water. That's really what, our mission is to connect, more people with nature and the outdoors. When it comes to Dockwa, right, that's getting out on the water. But we really feel like we can better execute on that mission if you are the operating system that's providing a better experience for those boaters. So Merrill, if you're familiar with Harbor, right? But if you're on your marina in Boston Harbor, for the season, we want the experience of, hey, my marina uses Dockwa, so for me to lease a slip and to pay for that slip, it's super easy. I can look at Dockwa and know when my next bill is coming or what's on my next invoice. And if I want to go across the harbor and get fuel, I don't have to take my wallet out because that marina also uses Dockwa's point of sale, and it's just a cashless automatic transaction. And then I'm going to go over to Martha's Vineyard for a few nights and I can book my reservation on Dockwa. We really want us to be sort of that connective tissue that just makes that experience much more enjoyable for the boater. And then on the other end, on the marina, right, operationally, it streamlines things.
Well, it looks
Very
like
cool.
I'm not going to be able to get away with not paying because it's all going to be tracked now.
Yeah.
Do you make a habit of that?
Huh?
Right? Too funny. Well, so Matt, tell me this though. You mentioned the camping software. Were you able to just sort of pick up everything that had happened for Dockwa and just like change the branding and change the categories and bloop, and now you have a brand new vertical? Or is it like how much work and time and effort and money sort of went into that?
Yeah, well, it's still work, right? It's still time, it's money, it's engineering resources, it's prioritization that takes focus away from other things, right? So there's a balancing act that needs to happen. We built Dockwa as a way there was a platform. So I'm not saying to you it's cut and paste, but the problem is very, very similar in outdoor recreation. So if you're looking at RV parks, campgrounds, and what's really, really interesting about it, like you need to change certain things, right? They're talking about campsites or RVs and not boats. So you need to change certain nomenclature in the product and some experiences. But for the most part, it's a very similar problem. And from an operational standpoint on the business side, it's very, very similar.
Yeah.
And the cool thing about it that we like is like you might look at a marina and their average business in the United States anyway, somewhere to 5 to 10% of their business is transient or short-term guest. It's almost inverse on the campground and recreation side. Not quite, but it's somewhere around like 70% of their overall revenue comes from the short-term stays. So we just feel like we're really, really well positioned to immediately have big impact. Wow. And that market's a little bit bigger, and the barriers to entry are, a little less from a consumer standpoint. So, for most people, it's easier to, get in the car with their family and head to a campground or rent an RV and drive it themselves than it is to, figure out how to drive a boat for the first time, right?
Yep. And you'd mentioned that you were the first mover on the boater side. Were you the first mover on the RV side, or did
No, that's a really good question. It's a bit more crowded. The market is a little bit bigger on that side. So I think, by nature, there's been some entrants that have sort of like the Dockwa equivalents that have done seemingly pretty well. We think there's space to play, right, where we can go in and we can actually compete, and we have a lot of scar tissue that we've learned over the last 7+ years that are going to help us scale a little bit more quickly on that side. Yeah, but there is more competition there than there was in the marine industry, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? I also mentioned that it can be really tough to be a first mover. Sometimes if some of that education is done for you and you come with a product with that's at least at parity or has some unique value, it can really be effective.
Right.
Now, as we kind of come to a conclusion, a lot of our listeners range from the beginning of business to the middle of business to far into it. And I'm wondering if you have a bit of advice for each phase that you've learned along the way, beginning, middle, and, I'm not going to say end, but where you're at now.
Yeah. Now you guys are the giants. Yeah, that's hilarious. But
I'm not dumb enough to say we're at the end. I still think, we're in the early innings. We have learned a lot, luckily, but we got a ways to go to execute on what we're trying to do. I do get this question asked, fairly regularly, not necessarily in the later stages, but more in the early. And my answer isn't necessarily very profound, but I had someone that I respect very early on that told me not most entrepreneurs or people that have a business idea, they think that they need to protect it and they shouldn't tell everybody because that idea is going to get stolen. And they said, ideas are a dime a dozen. You should talk to every single person about your idea that you can, even if it's a competitor that you think, could steal it, because it's going to inform your strategy, or it is going to make you more bullish on the idea, or it'll introduce you to other people. So talk to as many people as you can about it. And that always just stuck with me in the early days where,
that's good advice.
We weren't great. And, a good output of that, I think of that as an example, is very early on, we found out that another company, it was called Dockwa, was starting. And so we're like, who is this company? It's starting, and they actually turned out to be just like right in our own backyard. It was doing a very similar thing, and they were launching in the Boston area. This was in 2015. Because we could easily just like shy away from that and, just say, okay, we're going to go head to head and compete. But we reached out to Tyler, the Dockwa founder, and we ended up being really good friends, and we hit it off immediately. So much so that we ended up merging both of our companies early on, saying, hey, we like working with each other. We think we can be more successful from the get-go than trying to fight it out in our own backyard. Like, what do you say? And
smart.
Merged companies. Tyler joined us as the co-founder. He's with us, still. We've been building the business for the past 8 years, but I think that's just an example of sort of an opportunity that if you sort of abide by that methodology of, not being afraid to tell gear or talk to as many people as possible, the doors that it can actually open up. So I'd say that's my 50,000 foot view advice.
And that's pretty profound, by the way. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, just very simply, never lose touch with the customer. Like, I'm still on calls weekly with marina operators. I'm still in marina offices. And so is our CEO, Mike. You can never truly lose touch with that, particularly in an industry like this, right? Which is a bit resistant to change, is using sort of outdated tool sets, very seasonal as well. Right? The ebbs and the flows of this industry make it difficult where, right after the season, they're trying to haul boat, and service them. And many of are saying, okay, I'm going to take a little bit of a break and I'll come back in April just in time to splash boat. The craziness of the seasonal sort of swings can actually make it very difficult to get in like a good cadence. More you can actually stay close to your customer base and like truly listen, the better. And an example of that for us was we started with transient on the marina side, but grown into a more complete offer because we incremental and just saying, great, if we accrue a marketplace of marinas, we know that transients are the biggest piece of the pie, but let's listen to them and let's say, what else is challenging about your operation? What other tools are you looking to improve? And then we can build from there. And hopefully if we do that, we're going to be able to add unique value to the boater side and execute on our mission of making it easier to get out on the water. So never grow out of listening to the customer, spending time with the customer.
And that's interesting because you almost described that they become an idea bank for your business.
Without a doubt. 100%. Yep.
Yeah.
Now, when you have a certain amount of customers, like you need systems in place to be able to prioritize and weed out some of the noise, right? Like, regardless of who your customer base is, they're always going to ask sometimes for like the faster port. And you need to be able to say, well, how many people are asking for this? And is actually this the best solution? Now, I don't think you're all that. We have our engineering team and product managers that are very, very good at listening, to what people are saying, distilling down true to the root cause of the problem, and then coming up with, the ideas for the solution. But I think the trick is a lot of people say, okay, this customer feedback, they're asking for this thing, and they jump to the conclusion that that's the solution. The magic is when you can really just listen, synthesize, and then come up with the optimal solution that maybe they're not asking for, right? But you understand the problem enough to be able to come up with it on your own.
That's cool.
And
with that, where can people find you and use your app and all of that?
Sure. Yeah. So the app is Dockwa, Dockwa. You can use us on the web, dockwa.com, or Android, or in the Apple Store as well. So boaters, feel free to take a look and download it. Me personally, I'm not hard to find. It's Matthew Fradette on LinkedIn. My email is matt@dockwa.com. So feel free to shoot me a note.
Awesome.
Nice. Okay. And can we just bug you, because we know you've been on the water. What's like your best or your worst boating adventure?
Oh man. So this was a long time ago, but this was actually in New Zealand when I was out taking a small, I forget even what kind of boat it was. More like a water taxi type of boat, but I was going out to the Stewart Islands for a camping trip for like 5 or 6 days with a couple buddies. And the seas were just really, really high. And we didn't necessarily know if we were going to make it out to that camping trip. It was pretty frightening. And this was back in, I want to say 2005. I remember because on the way back, the person in the water taxi, and I say water taxi, but we were out on the water for like several hours trying to get to these islands. And it was right around the time that Katrina happened. So it was,
oh boy.
The stuff told us that it had happened in the United States, and we had been sort of in the woods on an island for 5 or 6 days, so we had no idea, and that's how we found out. But it was a sketchy time trying to get out there, and the time that I'll never forget.
Fun times. Okay. Thank you so much, Matt.
And navigating those, so I went with someone else, and always do your homework first.
Maybe that's where the seed for Dockwa sort of started. Is that, I wish we had somewhere to go. Yeah.
Yeah. Guys, thanks. I appreciate you inviting me on. It was fun to chat, and look forward to doing more of it in the future.
Absolutely. Keep us abreast of all your crazy adventures, and good luck changing the marine industry.
Best of luck to you guys as well.
Peace.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Take care.
Check back every Tuesday for our latest episode, and be sure to like, share and subscribe to SHIPSHAPE.pro.